Okay. Um, I believe we have two cases, one from Japan and one from Canada. Um, what about we start with Japan, the Sanyo case?
Okay, um, Miss Grishowick, Mr. Grishowick, can you share screen?
Sure, sure.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. So the case we have today is a case from the Japan Fair Trade Commission called the Sanyo Marunaka case. And so the background of this case is I'm going to talk about the nature of this company first. So Sanyo Marunaka operates supermarkets mainly in the Okayama prefecture in Japan. This prefecture is like in the western region of Japan around Osaka. And based on the information found concluded by the Japan Fair Trade Commission, the JFTC, Sanyo Marunaka is considered as one of the largest among department stores and supermarkets in the same prefecture, and it has the highest sales of retail-related food. And not only that, Sanyo Marunaka increases the numbers of the stores every year, and with its annual turnover of more than 120 billion Japanese yen, or around 1 billion US dollars. And moreover, based on from interviews with suppliers of Sanyo Marunaka, many suppliers expect to conduct business with Sanyo Marunaka in the future. And the reason for that are mainly three reasons below. The first one is that many suppliers have Sanyo Marunaka as their main client. And not only that, some suppliers find that it is difficult to secure clients who produce as much sales as Sanyo Marunaka. So basically, not only they have Sanyo Marunaka as their main client, Sanyo Marunaka actually like have the highest proportion of sales for them as well. So it's difficult for them to like find another big customers who can really like produce as much sales. And the last one is that some suppliers say that they value the business relationship they have with Sanyo Marunaka, again, due to its high proportion of sales. So this is to give you a background understanding of like how influential Sanyo Marunaka is in its market. And now the next slide. I just Google map like the density of the Sanyo Marunaka stores in the area, just to give you a picture of like um how how big they are in the Okayama prefecture. So only in the Okayama city area in the left picture, they have 18 stores across like the city, and it's a supermarket. So having like 18 supermarkets in like the same area is like it makes you quite a big customers to the supplier. And also in the right hand side, do you have the number of stores in the Kagawa prefecture is like below the Okayama prefecture. Again, 19 stores in like such a small area. You can see like how how big they are within the region. And now we're moving on to the timeline of the case. So this case is quite long. It just ended recently. It started back in June 2011 when the JFTC decided to open an investigation against Sanyo Marunaka. and then they issue a cease and desist order against Sanyo Marunaka, along with a surcharge payment order for approximately 2 million US dollars. Interesting fact is that the Sanyo Marunaka case is actually like the first case that is relating to unfair trade practices in Japan regarding like abuse of superior bargaining power. So yeah, the JFTC was pretty much finding like expanding its portfolio in this the abuse of superior bargaining power, and Sanyo Marunaka was like the the very first one who was like attacked, basically. And in the cease and desist order in 2011, the JFTC found that Sanyo Marunaka violated Article 295 of the Anti-Monopoly Act by abusing its superior bargaining power over its supplier. So there are at least five actions from Sanyo Marunaka that the JFTC found to be like contributing to abuse to be an abuse of its superior bargaining power. So the actions consist of from January 2007 to May 2010 at the latest. Sanyo Marunaka was basically requesting tons of things from its suppliers. First, it requested suppliers to send their own employees to Sanyo Marunaka stores, like to help with shelving, help with a new store openings, renovations. So basically, they were asking like their suppliers to actually send like the supplier's own employees, which like have no relationship at all as an employees of the Sanyo Marunaka. And then they were also requesting suppliers to provide money to Sanyo Marunaka. Like they would use reason like Sanyo Marunaka is opening a new store. So please the suppliers, please send us some money to like support this new store. That was the reason they gave. And then they also returned the goods to some suppliers by alleging that they had passed the sales deadline, which the deadline is actually set by Sanyo Marunaka itself. And not only that, they were also reducing the account payable to its suppliers if the goods were sold at a discounted price. So, for example, if you buy an egg from a supplier and then you Sanyo Marunaka actually like sell it at a lower price, instead of paying the full price of the eggs, they actually like pay the discounted price, which like somehow doesn't make sense because you buy them when they were in good condition. So that's basically like what they did. And then also the fifth actions that the JFTC found is that they were requiring some suppliers to actually purchase Christmas related products from Sanyo Marunaka. And collectively, these five actions were gathered from information from around like 146 suppliers. So the JFTC decided to order a cease and desist order against Sanyo Marunaka. And then after the 2011 order, Sanyo Marunaka actually appealed this order to the JFTC, but it was a long case, and then in 2019, the JFTC dismissed the appeal, but also it reduced the surcharge payment for a little bit. Sanyo Marunaka doesn't give up. They filed a lawsuit against JFTC, and at the end, in last year, December, the Tokyo High Court rendered the cease and desist order illegal, which Pin will explain like why it was decided as illegal. Now, moving on to the market definition. So, in the decision, it was in Japanese, so we try our best to find the information. But basically, the JFTC did not provide a market definition and market power assessment in its order, or even in other later decisions relating to this case. And the reason for that is we suspect or that it was because the JFTC guidelines concerning abuse of superior bargaining position. These guidelines actually provided that a superior bargaining position can be established without the need to assess the relevant product and geographic markets, as well as the size of the alleged offender. So basically, superior bargaining position can exist without market power. You can be abusing. So um, you were looking more at the relationship you have with your trading partners more than the relationship you have like within the relevant market as a whole. And in this same JFTC guidelines, a superior bargaining position can be established if two conditions were met. The first condition is that the suppliers will need to continue transactions with the retailer because discontinuing the transaction will impede the supplier's business substantially. And the second condition is that the supplier have to find it difficult to reject the retailer's request, even when such request causes substantial disadvantage to the supplier. So if we can look at the request that Sanyo Marunaka was making to its suppliers in the last slide, it was requesting the supplier sending money to Sanyo Marunaka, and the supplier could have like rejected to send the money, but they feel like losing Sanyo Marunaka as like their main client will not be beneficial for them. So they like basically give up and send them the money. So just to give you a picture of how the trading relationship between Sanyo Marunaka and their supplier is. So in this case, I suspect no, it's like from the JFTC guidelines and the information we found, we think that Sanyo Marunaka in somehow has a superior bargaining position over their suppliers. And the approach of not defining a market definition and market power was used consistently by the JFTC when deciding an abuse of superior bargaining position case, not only in this case. So in 2011, they also have a Toy R Us case, 2012, an Eden case, 2013, Ross case, and 2014, Direct case. So these four cases, including Sanyo Marunaka, is like the five main cases regarding abuse of superior bargaining position um, introduced by the JFTC. And we'll now be moving on to the analysis of the case.
Thank you, Paola. Now for the analysis, I will first looking into the each order that JFTC accused the Sanyo Marunaka. The first one is the cease and desist orders. Uh, the JFTC accused that the Sanyo Marunaka is is uh, exercise its superior bargaining power in uh, under the article 295 subparagraph A to subparagraph C, which can be concluded into mainly three sections. The first one, which is like A, is have the other party who continue to trade purchase product other than the product related to the transaction. This one will be A. And the second one have the other party who continue to trade, provide money or service for himself or herself. This is the subparagraph B. And the last one is after receiving the product related to the transaction from the other party of the transaction, and the other party of the transaction was made to take over the products, or the other party of the transaction was reduced the amount of consideration of the transaction, which is actually the subparagraph C of uh, this article. Uh, we will look back into the each action of Sanyo Marunaka in this slide. We will see that the first two is uh, is prohibited under the subparagraph B. of the article, and this tool will is in contact is prohibited under subparagraph C. And the last one, by requiring the supplier to purchase, which is a forced purchase, is prohibited under the subparagraph A. And now, looking into this cease and desist order again, all of such action of Sanyo Marunaka was mentioned in the cease and desist orders, and in addition to its power in the market, which is like Sanyo Marunaka like purchase almost all the products sold at its store by the suppliers, and it's the largest business operator among the department stores and has the highest ratio of sale of retail food sale in Okayama prefectures. And also the suppliers have a Sanyo Marunaka as their main business partners. Therefore, the JFTC assumed that it will be difficult for the supplier to find another business partner instead of Sanyo Marunaka. So the difficulty is also the reason mentioned by JFTC in this audit. And so the JFTC order mainly four of this, which is to cancel all 5 actions mentioned before that Sanyo Marunaka perform on suppliers now and in the futures. And Sanyo Marunaka must notify supplier of measures taken based on these orders and revise its course of conduct in compliance with Anti-Monopoly Act, and also to promptly report to JFTC of measures taken based on this order every year for the next 3 years. On the same days, the JFTC also accused Sanyo Marunaka by putting this surcharge payment orders for all the cost of the action that Sanyo Marunaka perform on all the suppliers. JFTC used its authority under Article 26 of the Anti-Monopoly Act, and in order to calculate the surcharge in this audit, the scope of the calculations actually, as Perwa said, it's such action start from January of 2007, right? However, as the violation period exceeds 3 years, so this article like proposed that the period of violation is only 3 years. So the calculation start from 19 of May 2007 and to 18 of May. Sorry, I put in the wrong number. 2010. And the number of the company using in order to calculate this around 200 million Japanese yen is 165 companies, which JFTC consider the supplier, and this one is the first orders that JFTC put on the Sanyo Marunaka. after like according to the background, after the order was put on the Sanyo Maruka appeals to JFTC first, and the result of the appeals was that JFTC have their first trial decisions. This happened around the same time that JFTC dismissed the case in 2019. And so this lead to the file of the lawsuit from Sanyo Maruga to the courts in order to cancel these two orders and it's changed in the first trial decision made by JFTCs. So the issues was mainly that whether the cease and desist order dated 22 June of 2011 after the charge by the first trial decision should be cancelled, and second, whether surcharge payment order dated 22 June of 2011 of the first trial decision that was partially dismissed, the accused request for appeals should be cancelled. And move on to the next slide. This is the court judgment of this case. In order to look into the main two issues I mentioned before, the court set the sub-issues into four. However, in considering it, the court looked only into the last one, which is the illegality of both of the orders. And in considering this, the first one is the cease and desist orders. The court said that this this first order is the JFTC authority into using this order is under 49 Article 49 of the Anti-Monopoly Act, and the reason is of this is that the JFTCs have to provide a specific information about the reasons of the orders and conduct a hearing opinion in writing to the accused, which is Sanyo Marunaka, in order to inform people and provide convenience to allegations. However, the court found that there is no specific information about the suppliers who is the party of such action. So the court deemed that this order is incomplete and must be revoked. And for another one, which is the surcharge order. The court said that as there appear to be the differences in number of the suppliers, as you can see above, that currently there are only 177, unlike the former slide that the JFC said that it have 165 company. So the difference is because this number is proposed by Sanyo Maruka, since it said that this 127 is the targeted targeted suppliers. And when looking into the JFCC investigation, the uh, the 165 company is come from the infer using the limited information of JFTCs, so that by using this number to calculate the surcharge is not acceptable under the Article 50 of the anti-monopoly laws. So overall, the judgment is that all of the actions orders should be revoked since it violates the Article 49 and Article 50 of anti-monopoly laws. And lastly, after the case was decided by the Tokyo High Court, the JFTCs also provide a sorry. JFTC provide the last order, which is the trial decision on 27 of 2011, which followed the really similar approach to the Tokyo High Court judgment. And in conclusion, it said that as there is no reason for an accused request of the accused, because of all the orders in this case should be revoked, and without having to judge the other point of the orders. And this trial decision will be made on excuse as per the main text in accordance with the Anti-Monopoly Act. Therefore, the conclusion is the case that JFCC cancelled all the order in this case. Yeah, and I think this conclude my part.
All right. Thank you. Well, honestly, I still don't really thoroughly understand the. Well, can we just check my understanding a bit? So basically, the decision by the High Court was made on the ground that this is the undue process, or else. Because I mean, the High Court saw that the Commission issues its orders in the illegal manner. Is that the issues that the High Court considered?
Yeah. It's the decision of the High Court is mainly the illegality of the process that JFTC used in order to put such orders on the Sanyo Marunaka. And it was decided based on such illegality.
Right. Okay. Wait. Because if you look at the case, I think it happened in 2009, right? If I understand correctly. I mean, the issue has been brought to the Fair Trade Commission in 2009. Or before that, and the decision was made in 2009, and the period, the cease and desist order. Oh, okay, so it was issued in 2011, and it took 8 years during the appeal process. No, the decision was made in 2011, right? And
Yes.
and then there was a 3-year process of the restraint, right, that was given in the order. So has that, I mean, 3 years been passed already, or it has never been in effect?
So, the information you found doesn't like mention the enforcement of the order, but we suppose that the order is still in place throughout the appeal process.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I think like the reason why they fought so hard on this was because there's also like a payment order.
Yup. Which is in slide 6.
Yes.
And the surcharge calculation was, I think, is in retrospect, right? It's like going back for 3 years.
Yes.
Okay. And this surcharge payment serves as sort of like the um, extra profits that you incurred due to your practice, right?
Like actually the JFTC didn't like actually explain where the number came from as well. But I think like yeah, it's the exceeding amount of what they receive or like the calculation of the damage that the suppliers receive from like the request they make to the suppliers.
Right. So again, okay, I think I sort of understand the picture now, but what exactly was wrong with these orders so that the High Court has to dismiss and say that well, the orders have to be revoked? What is unclear?
Like Prava said before, like we look into the surcharge payment orders, and even though the one section of uh, the order uh, is labeled as the basic of surcharge calculation, we couldn't find like how this number came from. It's only said the number of the supplier and the period of time, but like the number kind of come off of nowhere. And so this was one point that the court used uh, to exercise power to deem that this surcharge is like unclear,
Right,
and
right.
also the yeah, and to that imply that there is like 155 supplier instead of like investigated thoroughly.
Mm. Mm.
Illegal.
Okay. Yeah, I got it. Well, I think it's going to be so interesting to look into detail. I mean, not now, but this is actually a good lesson, right? Because if you look at, particularly here in Thailand, um, most of the cases have been appealed to the administrative court already, right? Pretty much all decisions. I was told by the staff that essentially there was non-decision. There was an appeal to the administrative court, and certainly the main focus of the administrative court would be on the due process as well. Like in this case, they would they may have a look at the substance, but surely one thing, because by the nature of the administrative court, they would have to look at the process, right? And ascertain that it is a due process. So that is why, as a commission, it is really important that they have to gather as much information as possible, because they would like to prevent this sort of circumstance. Okay, just sorry, yeah, that was pretty much my questions. But is there any points or questions from the other group?
No, no for me.
Yes. What about Prim?
No. But actually, I want to point out that it's interesting how, like, in the beginning, they said it's not important to consider geographic and product market, but rather, like, the bargaining position, because I feel
Mm,
like that affects the market more. Because
mm,
it's not like in all cases that, like, um, companies with I mean, like, companies with broader market definition, like companies that can be characterized as dominant under like market definition will necessarily have to abuse their power or conduct unfair trade practices.
mm. Yeah, yeah. This is actually something that I wanna discuss as well. Um, the way I look at this is this: in Japan, anti-monopoly law, there are two kinds of practice. All right, there are two kinds of practice that sort of are similar to what we have here in Thailand. The first thing is called private monopolization, right? Which is essentially the sort of the equivalent version of abuse of dominance that we have in Article 50. Another kind is this unfair trade practice. Um, what is interesting here, and this is just my personal way of looking at this to very similar conducts. Um, when you think about it, if you have this sort of market dominant position, or if you are a monopolist, you certainly that sort of status quo guarantees certain level, not certain level, but guarantee you the superior bargaining power as well, right? Because if you are the leader, or you are a monopoly, you are the only one seller in the market, or if you are a really big player in the market, then basically it means that it doesn't matter which trading partners we are talking about, you can pick anyone out of that particular market, and you can quite confidently say that, well, this um, undertaking, right? This business operator is definitely having a superior bargaining power over that business operator that we pick out from the market. So what I meant is that whenever you have this sort of market dominant position, it sort of guarantees that you would have this superior bargaining power, right? So this chain of logic is quite clear, and that is why that is the situation in which you relies pretty much on the structure, because the structure to this extremity guarantees such a level of implication that you can say that, oh, well, whenever you have this market dominant position, you have superior bargaining power. But this is not always the case, because if you look into the market and especially look at reality, you can see that even though you have so many different choices, but it is not always easy for you to switch across different trading partners. If the market works perfectly, as we learned in earlier classes, if the market worked perfectly, there would be no cause from doing that. One day I trade with these trading partners, and if there's something go wrong, or they are using some unfair conditions, I can basically switch to another in the next day, right? But I mean, reality is not as simple. There are so many different constraints, right? There are substantial switching costs and transaction costs involved. So even if I don't, or they don't have market power, or even like dominant position, it is still possible that I could be locked in certain relationship, and I will be in the inferior side of the bargaining, right? So that's how I look at this picture. So basically, this is like the expansion of the scope, because well, market power would guarantee lots of things, but at the same time, an absence of market power doesn't mean that there's nothing to be worried about, because what we are worried about is essentially the conducts, right? So they work pretty much together, these two provisions. One is to capture a clear case in which if you have market power, it's just quite sure that you would have the superior bargaining power and you can do whatever you like. But even if in an absence of market power, the other case is you might still be able to exercise these practices unfairly, right? Whether it's when this is unfair, that's another issue. But that's that's the way I look at these two conducts, and I mean try to link them up. Does it make sense?
Yeah, but do you think it's more appropriate, say in some cases, to assess superior bargaining power without like assessing traditional criterias of market power?
Yeah. Well, because I mean this is a bit abstract, but if you look at this sort of bargaining power or relationship between two parties, that is essentially the market power in its own rights, right? Because the scope is pretty much on this sort of bilateral relationship, right? So and because we don't think that is unfair trade practice, we don't consider that, okay, given that we would like to draw the market because we would like to know if you have a sort of structural characteristic as a dominant player or not, right? We don't care because we know that probably that is not the case, and that is fine. Or even if, I mean, in this case, probably we have done that already, and we know that you are not a dominant player, right? But we sort of zoom in and draw this sort of like smaller market definitions, having just two parties, and we find out that is any, given this sort of most granular, well, scope, they don't use the term market definition here anymore, but you can think of this as like the broader definition of market definition, right? It is not in the legal sense, but in reality. So you look at these two firms, you try to understand that sort of interaction, right? So the concept is pretty much the same, but just because they don't use the sort of conventional market definition, and that is because they don't think that the market structure is of interest now. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to achieve is you're trying to promote fair, right? Fair competition, and basically, if you recall this sort of structure conduct relationship proposed by Bain, um, you can see that structure was basically used as a proxy, right? Structure was used as a proxy because in the old days, well, not in the old days, but in so many industries or so many contexts, it is quite difficult that you would be able to find out the conducts, especially precisely, right? But um, but unfair trade practices were basically invented to fill the gap because, as I said, being a proxy doesn't mean that when you have this sort of structure, it always leads to conduct. But it doesn't mean that in an absence of the structure, these conducts will not occur, right? So it's just right. This unfair trade practice is like this gap filling provision. Mhm. So let me draw you this picture that I have in mind. So this is really important because in practice, as I said, this unfair trade practice has been used a lot, like seriously a lot, and you can see in Thai competition law, right? That pretty much, I think, all cases that were completed by the OTCC so far are essentially unfair trade practices. Right? The energy drink, the well, what was it? The motorbike, right? So these cases were based on unfair trade practices. And one reason is this. I think it's just interesting. When you think about some particular industries or some particular countries where the competition commission is still not that mature. They don't really have resources, especially experiences and data, to determine the structure of the market. Right? Because they are still working on these market studies, try to understand different markets like wholesale fruit market, try to understand the what toilet equipment market, try to understand platforms, try to understand food delivery market, e-commerce market. This basically means that they are still accumulating that structure, market structure knowledge. In these jurisdictions where the commission are still quite young and they don't have that much knowledge of the structure, the unfair trade practices prevalent is just unavoidable, right? Because okay, if you can't really consider structure, you don't have the precise understanding of the structure, and you know that even if the private parties hand in the study telling you that this should be the structure of the market, you can't really trust them. Probably the base alternative is that you go for the conduct, right? Because it is true that you have criminalized this abuse of dominance, but at the same time you don't have sufficient resources to prove until without further doubt that the undertaking has conducted an illegal conduct, right? So you basically it's probably a better idea that you switch to the alternative and saying that, okay, I know that the structure is something that I can't prove, but let me scope down into these two parties, and if I can prove that their conducts are unfair, then I think I can do something, right? So I think that is pretty much the nature, and that explains why in reality most of the cases at the moment for a young commission like Thailand's commission are unfair trade practices or conduct-based accusations, right? This is clear.
Actually, when you said like when you mentioned about how competition commissions in countries that aren't so mature yet, like does that mean like are you suggesting that in some countries where competition law hasn't, say, crystallized in such a form that is like hasn't crystallized into a very strict principle that can be easily applied, the competition commission would normally resort to like provisions that can be interpreted very broadly, like unfair trade practices, to handle cases?
It's double-edged sword, right? I
Yeah,
think you
because the
recognize that.
provisions like intended to be to like like I think the last like subsection of like section 57 or something, I think like it says like การกระทำใดๆ like it can literally be anything, right?
Yeah, that's that's a difficulty. Yeah, it is absolutely. I understand your concern, and well, if you believe that the market should work and the intervention should be limited to just only when it is necessary, then that makes complete sense. You should not have this like so broad interpretation of the law to intervene in the market, because well, but honestly, I'm a bit biased towards the, because now if you consider reality, we have to admit that competition law has never existed here. But the previous one was basically a joke, and if you believe, well, with certain level of confidence, if you believe that the state of the market now is so distorted, right? It's so curbed in such a way that having this broad interpretation would alleviate the distortion, then probably that makes sense. But I think the balance of power there, especially when you consider this Japanese court case, is that you have to do it in such a way that is due, right? That you have to guarantee that you have the due process, and everything should be able to explain in a clear manner why you make such decisions. A clear manner in such a sense that you have this sort of theoretical backup, you have empirical evidence to back up your decisions. So the balance of power is there, right? Because now you have this sort of judicial power balancing this administrative power as well, and that's the system by design. So it doesn't mean that even if you use this Article 57, you can use this unboundedly, well, because you have this as a balance of power in place already as well. But I do understand your concern, and well, that is essentially why I spend so much time on this economic understanding, and what that is essentially why you need to learn those things before you can understand competition law, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm just like curious on how it works, like as a big picture.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. So this is the classic, this sort of like trade-off between the rigidity and flexibility, right? You write everything so explicitly. When something comes up, then the principle of retroactivity then basically means that, well, pretty much people will just get away, right? But at the same time, if you write it in such a very flexible manner, what you have to give up is that, well, sometimes it might be you overly empower the commission, and that might ruin the market as well. So this is pretty much more of the art and science, right?
I just want to ask, like, why, like, some big countries like the US or the UK,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't have the unfair trade practices like law. But we can't find like a case relating to unfair trade practices. So, like, I want to ask you if there is like any law regarding this area.
But the US have, right? The US has one, the unfair trade practices, but it is not particularly popular. I think the root of these Japanese and Korean unfair trade practices was actually from the U.S. Clayton Act, but I think one thing is well, it might, okay, so for example, in the UK, these unfair trade practices would be considered mainly through the lens of the tort law, right? So because it's pretty much the relationship between parties and private parties, and basically that's the nature, right? When one party injured the other party, that's pretty much tort. And they might consider that competition is pretty much something of the well, it has a bit of, well, it has a little flavor of public law, right? Because when you think about competition law, it's very much about like, wow, the market structure, because you ruin this competition, so well, consumers or suppliers got affected by your conduct, right? That's sort of like some sort of the public nature of it. And in some jurisdictions, when you talk about it, sort of unfair trade practices, you get a sense that this is really private, right? This is pretty much like between two parties, and you should consider through the lens of this private law, which could be taught. But and if you think about it, even in Thailand, in an absence of competition act, you could probably go to the court, right? And accuse another business from um, under the umbrella of tort as well, right? So I don't see any problem with doing that, because this is essentially saying someone damages your rights, right? It could be your economic rights or whatever. So that explains why in some particular jurisdictions, in particular in the UK, they don't really put an emphasis on this unfair trade practices, especially in the bilateral manner, because they view that as a more of sort of private uh, dispute. In the US, well, I think the paradigm is probably a bit different, because in the old days, you have to look at competition law as something that's very dynamic, right? What you are not seeing nowadays doesn't mean that it has never existed, right? In the old days, you have to look at the origin of the antitrust law, right? Back in the late 19th century. Um, there was pretty much the relationship between the trust, right? The big firms against like farmers or um, really smaller, much smaller entrepreneurs, and having these trusts like in the oil industry or in some particular industries, they are just dominating the market, and that was pretty much the reason why the antitrust law was passed. So if you look at it, the structure at the very beginning is pretty much about, and I think you all have been to the US, and you may recall that everything was so big there, right? I don't know why, but everything, I mean, physically and also conceptually was so big. And so the antitrust law is based on just pretty much the same principle, that you have some big companies that dominate the market, and the unfair trade practices was actually consumed as a part of this concept, right? So it's it's more of this like historical reason as well, that while I mean they care more about these big firms because their economy was huge, and they don't have that much resources to deal with all like minuscule cases, right? So basically they pool most of the resources to deal with the big cases, big players, and because of the exponential economic growth in the past century in the US, you understand that just simply focusing on these big sort of market dominant firms, monopoly, um, that's that's a lot already, right? But in some sort of particular state, there are actually unfair trade practices act passed at the state level as well, and they have been used sporadically in certain circumstances and in particular industries, right? So, but if you consider the sort of the newer law, for example, like in Korea or in Japan, you look at their economies, and well, basically in maybe in post World War II, Japan was, I mean, pretty much in a really bad condition, right? Korea was still underdeveloped. Korea just, I mean, took a leap in the past just 30 or 40 years. And therefore, at the very beginning, when they were, I mean, they were sort of, I mean, these competition laws were pretty much transplanted into the legal system. These competition laws were not developed like evolutionarily in that sense, like in the other cases, like in the Europe or in the US, where you start from this sort of feudalism, you go to capitalism, and the system change. People ask for some regulations to control this imbalance of the system itself. But in Asia in particular, in Japan, in Korea, including Thailand, in these regions, this competition law was pretty much introduced to us by the Westerners. And this goes back to the argument that I said earlier, right? When you got not really well, you got introduced and at the same time sort of coerced by these countries. When then you have to apply it a certain way, and competition law is going hand in hand with other policies as well, like trade policy and industrial policies. And if you look at the process of like this industrialization in Japan, the miracle in 1970s, and also Korea in the late 20th century, they have to use this in such a way that would accommodate that competition, but at the same time will not penetrate that development. And the unfair trade practices allow this discretion to be exercised. Right, so that is why most of the cases were used instead of unfair trade practices, and where the commission gets sort of like more familiar with certain tools, right? If you have a hammer, everything would basically be like nails. And that applies to the case of commission as well, or any organization. When you accumulate this expertise, accumulate this knowledge, right, and experiences with these unfair trade practices too, simply because at the very beginning of your commission you don't have that much resources to deal with other things because you don't know the market well, or at the same time, if you look at the industrial policy in these countries in the late 20th century, they they tend to promote bigger firms like Keiretsu, right, Saibatsu idea in Japan, conglomerate, because they believe that at the very beginning of development, you really need that sort of scale in order to be able to compete abroad, right? Um, Korea was indifferent. Korea tried to promote the big businesses as well. This switch from this ship makers or to invent and to develop this chip that we use in the computer and pretty much all electronic devices nowadays. And if you follow the news, that was actually a very good decision, right? Because now we have this shortage of chips worldwide, and one of the very stable player in the world in the global market is the Korea, the Samsung, right? So you look into the history, you understand the way that the economies have developed, and you understand why the competition law or the competition policy are different across different countries. So I come to my pretty much conclusion, and then we move on to the next group. Sorry, I spent so much time on this. That this is so important, especially in a country where this competition law is still immature, that you have to strike a really good balance, right? A good balance between this competition law exercise, like unfair trade practices, and your other policies that you're trying to promote your economy. Otherwise, too much competition is actually a bad thing, right? Okay. Hopefully, that address your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's go. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? For the text.
Okay, are you ready, game?
Yes.
Okay. So hello everyone. Today we're going to be presenting about a case in the Canadian Competition Tribunal, or the CCT, on refusal to deal, which is a form of unfair trade practice. So, like, to give an overview of the case, our claimant is Autodex, and it is a supplier of automotive data to insurance companies. And it brought a claim to the tribunal to compel parties with access to automotive listings data to supply itself with the listing data. So, like, basically, like Autodex is has like information, like has these data on cars and automobiles, and they would supply these data to insurance companies. So it business would rely on these data, and it brought a claim to the CCT because it alleged that the respondents in this case, which I will elaborate on later, has engaged in a refusal to deal. So to like assess this case, the tribunal applied prior case law, and in order to show existence of reasonable grounds for belief that could satisfy each element to a refusal to deal. So like in terms of market definition, and this is a similar point to like a case earlier presented by Perwa and Bin, because they did not exactly assess market definition, market power, those sort of things when determining refusal to deal or unfair trade practice. But the CCT said that the claimant was obliged to demonstrate that it was directly and substantially affected in its business as a result of the refusal to deal in order to prove for this unfair trade practice. And eventually, the tribunal found that because it has failed to demonstrate so, its application was dismissed. So it did not like constitute refusal to deal in this case. So that's the overview. So now let's move on to background. So as I have stated earlier, Autodex is a company based in Alberta, Canada, that provides data and software solutions to Canadian automobile insurance companies and automobile repair shops in order to streamline the accident claims process, which would include like cost of repairs and calculating market values of automobiles. And it offers two main services. The first one is the total loss valuation, and second one is partial loss estimating. The total loss valuation business, the service that Autodex offers to its customers, relies on automobile listings data. So because this total loss valuation services would refer to determination of market values of damaged automobiles for its insurance companies, customers, and on the other hand, like partial loss estimating would not rely on these automobile listings data. So like we could say conclude that like half of its services greatly relies upon this automobile listings data. Next slide, please. And our respondent in this case is CarProof. It's a company headquartered in Ontario, Canada, and it has a principal business in the sale of detailed vehicle history reports. And these VHRs are used by cars and sellers and buyers to obtain detailed information about a vehicle's past. And it also sublicenses some of the data to its to other industry participants. So like CarProof in this case would engage in a business concerning automobile listings data that Autodex relies upon. So to like give a clearer picture of the business relationship between the claimant and the respondents, as well as the two other companies involved in this case, Autodex, our claimant, has entered into an agreement with another company called Trader that provides a platform called Auto Trader, and it receives automobile listings data from Trader through its platform. This was back in 2009. Then in 2015, Trader sent Autodex a letter advising that it would like to terminate its Trader agreement because Trader has concluded another long-term exclusive agreement where it would provide automobile listings data to CarProof instead. So like it's like basically Auto Trader is terminating a previous contract with Autodex because it has concluded another contract which is exclusive with CarProof. And in 2014, like before Trader sent this letter of termination to Autodex, Autodex has unsuccessfully attempted to enter into an agreement with Marktplaats for access to Marktplaats platform called Kijiji, which is another Canadian automobile listings data. And in 2015, Kijiji also requested that Autodex stop its practice of accessing data on Kijiji. So it seems like for some reason everybody is denying Autodex of these automobile listings data. And in 2015, like in August, Autodex also learned that Marktplaats has already entered into an exclusive supply agreement with CarProof with respect to Kijiji's automobiles listings data. So because of this, so basically what happened was that like everybody that Autodex tried to trade with has decided to replace Autodex with CarProof instead, and CarProof would bind these businesses with exclusive supply agreements so that it could no longer provide any services in forms of automobile listings data to Autodex. So now it's like a battle between CarProof and Autodex. Next slide, please. So like the main issue that Autodex has brought the claim under was that it no longer has access to Auto Trader and Kijiji automobile listings data from Trader and Marktplaats. And yeah, so as I have previously stated, in the beginning, like in 2015, CarProof had exclusive supply agreements for listing data with Traders and Marktplaats, which are the two platforms that originally Autodex tried to develop a business relationship with. And CarProof used these listings data in preparing vehicle history reports for use of prospective used car sellers and buyers. Then Autodex attempted to negotiate a sub-license of the listings data with CarProof, but it was unable to agree on commercial terms. And eventually, like Autodex brought an application under the refusal to deal provision of the Competition Act, seeking order requiring CarProof, Trader, and Marktplaats to provide Autodex with listings data on usual trade terms. So, and this is because Autodex claims that the access to these automobile listing data from Auto Trader and from Kijiji is vital to its business because half of its like services, the total valuation service, it highly relies upon this automobile listings data, and without access to either of like Auto Trader or Kijiji's automobile listing services, Autodex is not able to receive a sufficient number of new listings per month. So like it can no longer provide total loss valuation services. Yeah, so like for the legal issues, Game will be elaborating on how like this may or may not contribute to refusal to deal.
Okay, before we jump right into the analysis, I would like to inform you that what exactly is refusal to deal first. Refusal to deal is not just like the supplier refuse to do one trade with their customer anymore, but refusal to deal is like a supplier has like an exclusive agreement with the other party and then stop the trade with the original customer. So in analysis under the Canada Competition Act, we need to, I think we need to look into the element of the refusal to deal under the section 75 of Canada Competition Act, which is it states that um, before before the tribunal or the commissioner granted leave under the section 103, which we will discuss that later after the element of the refusal to deal. The tribunal must find that a person which is that's business entity is substantially affected in his business or is precluded from carrying on business due to his inability to obtain adequate supplies of a product anywhere in the market on usual trade terms, and that the person mentioned in the paragraph A unable to obtain adequate supply from the product because of insufficient competition among suppliers of the product in the market, and and the person mentioned in paragraph A willing and able to meet the usual trade terms of supplier or supplier of the product, and the product is in ample supplies, and the result deal is having or likely to have an adverse effect on competition in a market. And this is the element of refusal to deal. But before the court can granted leave for refusal to deal, the court needs to mean like two elements of the leave test first. The leave test comprise of these two essential elements, which the applicant is directly or substantially affected in its business by refusal to deal, and the practice in question could be subject to an order under section 75, which we have discussed earlier, and for the leave test, analysis of the leave test, and it's substantially stated in section 103, the applicant by the law state the adverb substantially, and by substantially it means that the applicant need not demonstrate that it is affected by the refusal to the point of it being unable to carry on its business. Rather, it is required to establish on a balance of probabilities that it is affected in an important way or significant way. But the term directly hasn't been defined in this case because like the court state that by being directly affected, it means that you have to have a clear connection between the refusal from the supplier and to your business. And the other things we need to bear in mind is that all the elements of the section 75 must be carefully reviewed together. It means that if there is one insufficient evidence dealing with the element of the section 55, the leave cannot be granted from the tribunal. And the last thing is that the business to be considered on a leave application pursuant to section 75 is the entire business, not just of the applicant, not simply just a product line affected by the refusal to supply. And here's other tech claims. Other tech claim that its total loss valuation service will soon begin to experience significant performance issues if access to sufficient Canada automobile listing data is not restored due to the insufficiency of data source And the second is that as other text performance dips below the accept service level in its customer agreements, its customer will be able to terminate their contracts, and customers in renewal contracts process might be switched from other text into the other company in the market. Once Audit can no longer provide the total loss valuation service, which is the service that mainly solely rely on the dispute data, all revenue and profits generated from it will be lost too. And total loss service will generate approximately almost 1/4 as claimed by Audit, but in fact it's only just 22 to 23% of its revenue and benefit will rapidly decline to zero. And also the last one, Audit claimed that the other 1/3 of the profits which made from the partial loss valuations, which is didn't rely on the dispute data at all, will be severely affected too, because the agreement mentioned above normally include both of the two services from other texts. And these pie charts will show you why, because in the orange is the partial car repair, which is the service of Arctic that did not rely on the dispute data. But the dispute data only used in total or variation service, which in light blue here. You can see that it only made up 22 to 23% of the Arctic revenue. And this total loss valuation is only used by insurance company. And you can see that the agreement between other tax and insurance company contain both partial and total loss valuation service, which is light and dark blue. From the last slide, I said that there's agreement between other tech and customer, and that customer mainly is insurance company, which in the agreement, Artex will use the dispute data into its total valuation loss, which is the light blue, and use this using this data to provide service to the insurance company. And in that agreement between the insurance company, there are also there are two services in there, both total valuation loss and partial valuation loss, which we can see that if the agreement between Autotex and insurance company is dismissed, the effect from the refusal to deal might not be just 22% of Autotex revenue anymore. It will be 22% plus 33%, which is more than a half of Autotex revenue. But like Prim has said that Autotex application for leave to apply under section 75 of the Act is denied. And the tribunal has provided the reason that Autotex failed to meet the requirement of directly and substantially affect in the applicant's business, because the tribunal viewed that the total loss valuation service is only just a product line of Autotex, and Autotex failed to provide an obvious connection showing that the insufficiency of total loss valuation service data source could put Autotex business in jeopardy or harm the partial loss valuation service, which made up to like 75% of Autotex profits. And during the proceeding, which was months since Autotex has no access to the dispute data source, there were no evidence of lost sales of Autotex, and the tribunal also state that it is not necessary to consider whether Autotex has abused a sufficient evident to me the second part of the test for leave. And before the end of the discussion, I would like to leave this question, like, should the anticipate harm be considered, and why it is not necessary to consider the section 75 elements. And that is the end of the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, so interesting. Any questions or points?
Well, I think like it's interesting how the market definition and like the market power was also not defined in this case. So, I mean, that really shows the views of the competition authorities that these kind of unfair trade practices really doesn't like require a that you need to have a market the like dominant market position in order to like be committing a unfair trade practices.
Yeah. 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 I mean, as I said, this is like a zoom in version, right? You 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 sort of admit that this is either the case where you can't prove the market dominant positions due to whatever reasons. It could be the lack of data. Essentially, in most of the cases, is the lack of data, or this is just that you find that there's no dominant position in the market, but you still believe that well, certain conducts could be done and that would harm the competition. But one point that I would like to point out is this the leaf test, right? When you have a look at the leaf test, how do you understand it? Because this is actually the crucial point of this case, right? How do you understand the leaf test?
I think it's the point of this test is like the affected party doesn't need to actually show that it did in fact like suffer from the refusal to deal, but basically like show that if this either continues, there will be a probability that it will be unable to carry on its business because it will wait until like they cannot conduct their business anymore. That will be like have more harm than good. So I think that's the point of this test.
Right, right. Well, it's just interesting, right? That the leaf test is, well, it's still pretty much debatable. But if you look at the nature of these unfair trade practices, we know that, I mean, rivalry is essentially very normal, right? In the business world, you get stabbed in the back all the time. Otherwise, if you don't stab the other, then pretty much your competitor will stab you one day. So that's the nature of competition. It is not a friendly match, right? It is pretty much a well, it's pretty much a battle, right? So you won't expect that everything would be so straightforward. The strategy would be so naive in that manner. But so that's the nature of business. And that is why when you say that something is unfair, it has to be so clear that this is unfair. And the paradigm of most competition authority would be that, well, You don't want to intervene the market. You want the market to pretty much to use its own, right? To exercise this mechanism fully. Well, unless it is quite clear to you that it is on the verge of failure, then you would intervene. So you would put some sort of margin of error there, and saying that, well, even if you say that you get this refusal to deal, which should be actually a very typical business practice, right? Well, I should have a full authority to say that I don't want to do business with you, and mainly because I don't feel that is a mutual benefit to both of us, right? So I should be able to exercise this right, but um, well, the intervention should be at the other end of the spectrum, in the sense that, well, if the conduct is severe, so this is pretty much the I think it's more about the degree, right? It's not really about the conduct itself, but it's more about the effect, right? The effect be would would be to the certain extent that somebody has to leave the market or exit the market. If that is the case, then maybe we need to consider. Maybe we need to intervene, because it is true that you can refuse, but if you refuse, I mean, if your refusal is that influential, in the sense that when you decline to do the business with someone, that person has to leave the market, has to exit the market, it implies that, well, you have this sort of very substantial bargaining power, if not substantial market power, right? So in this case, maybe you have to intervene and have a look whether, well, this is just one of the necessary condition, but not sufficient, right? So basically, you have to consider other factors as well, as you point out. But again, if it is not to that extent that the severity is quite substantial, in the sense that the market would have less player, and that would harm the future competition definitely, then probably you should look the other way and let the market heal itself with its own mechanism. So I think that's the message of the leaf test, and whether when it is directly and substantially, I think that's the matter of discretion, and you. I think probably the cutting line is that you should be able to prove that it would be severe to the level that someone has to really leave the market if there's no intervention. But this is not always it is not always necessary for the authority or the commission to intervene anyway, because if you are weak, if basically you have done really bad business practices, your performance is really below par, then you might deserve to get out of the market. And the reason that they decline to do the deal with you is simply because you are really a bad business partner, and there's no potential of being a business partner with you, and that is pretty much a consensus by all business parties, then maybe you deserve to get out of the market, and the intervention should be unnecessary, right? So that's essentially the leaf test here. What do you think?
I agree with you, because in this case, I think the tribunal really interpret the word directly, very strictly, because other text state in the proceeding that the dispute data only used in total loss valuation, which made up only like 22% of its business revenue. But in the trial case, if the tribunal would like would make would grant a leave a leave a leave of reversal to dues, is must have had like I think 48% of revenue loss, and I understand that. I agree with your statement earlier that the cost needs to weigh between the nature of the market and its power. But in this case, I think it's quite clear that this 22% might have an effect to this 33% also. And I don't know why the cost didn't like I just don't understand why the cost denied the request from other texts. It is maybe just because other texts didn't provide enough like connection to show that there are relation between total loss, valuation service, and partial loss valuation service used by the insurance companies.
Right. Yeah, I think well, this is pretty much the fight between two private parties, right? And in this case, is I mean the tribunal was basically weighing between the evidence provided by the car proof and other texts, right? And whether surely what other text says would be that, well, we are affected significantly, and this is a credible threat that we will probably need to exit or leave the market. But and if you look at the condition, it has to be the whole business, not just one business line, right? And here we have this sort of total loss evaluation and the partial loss, and it turns out that the one product line that was particularly affected by this conduct is the total loss evaluation, which is, well, it's a substantial part here, but not really that substantial, because it's like 22%. I think that is one part of the reasons why it's still not really well, that's substantial in the, I mean, from the court's point of view. But truly, I mean, if you order text, you might want to prove that well, it is not just simply the total insurance, but by being unable to provide the service at the optimal level, then that would affect the potential business in the partial part as well. Well, I mean, basically all business functions or business line or product lines are interrelated, and if you can prove that somehow, maybe that would increase the weight on your argument. But at the same time, I mean, the car proof will try to prove otherwise, and I think one of the evidence that the court referred to in the verdict, and that the tribunal referred to in the verdict, was that I mean, even in an absence of the data provided during the process, the profit of the other texts has not decreased by much. So that is one of the evidence saying that, well, that is probably the self-evident that, well, this is not really in a sense part of your business, right? So, I mean, when you when you are pursuing these cases, especially as the fight between private and private, most of the times it depends on the weight, the relative weight of your evidence and arguments, not really on the absolute impact of your conduct. Right, so that is one part that's quite interesting when it comes to unfair trade practices, because it's mainly about to pretty much well, equivalent parties, right? They are standing on the same level playing field, and when you bring the case to the authority or to the court, then that your I mean, the weight of your evidence will play a really important part here, right? So that will be quite different from other cases like abuse of dominance or um, collusion, where it is more of the public by nature, and well, maybe it is not pretty much about the weight of your evidence, but this is more about whether it is credible that you have done something wrong, or you have damaged the economy or the competition, right?
I think like one of the reasons that auto text application was denied is the fact that it cannot show. I mean, yeah, the standard used is the probabilities, but they cannot provide like concrete evidence of what laws actually they're trying to refer to. I'm looking at like the last slide.
Yeah. And
I think that this is based on my like thought, but I think other tech wanted to provide the information, the lost informations of its revenue to the tribunal, but due to the nature of the business that um the total loss valuations and partial loss valuation to the insurance company, like based on the agreements, which and the, this case is this case occur in the time span of like I think not not in a year, just like 8 or 9 months, and I think the agreement might um might still did exist at the time, but it still it still didn't it still had not been terminated, so there are like no clear loss to show to the cost.
I mean, they could have like, I mean, if there is other examples from other companies or maybe like the nature of the industry. I mean, if they can show that due to the nature of this industry, there will be a loss if this continues, could have, they have just shown that?
what do you think?
I think other tech might have fight their lawyer after this case. Because I think they are like from my point of view, I think there are really clear connections between the total lot valuation and partial lot valuation, but I think they just fail to show it to the court, and that's why the application is denied.
Right, right. Okay, to address 2 points here. Well, probably you mentioned about the evidence by using sort of like the case studies, right? To compare to this case and use as the evidence, saying that, well, if as things stands, if you permit this refusal to go on, then basically I will be getting out of business. But that could do. But probably one thing is, this is really something that's really internal, right? I think it quite it should be quite difficult to, especially in practice. Um, the hardest thing is to find this sort of like insight or internal information from other companies to support your cases, um, unless there were any similar cases brought to the tribunal or to the court or to the commission before. So that will be, I think that probably is the explanation. And another case is another point that what you mentioned about was that it's quite clear to you that this adversely affect the business of auto tax. But again, I mean, even if you can prove so, I think the leaf test, the essence of it is that is of the magnitude or the severity of the impact. Whether it's severe enough so that you might have to exit the market, or it's just like adversely affect one line of your business. And probably you have to come up with a chain of well, to pretty much the the chain of events that's saying that, okay, even if this is a part of my business, just one product line, and even if you look at the empirical evidence, it's still not realized. The impact is still not materialized, and um, therefore, it's I mean, it seemingly implies that this is not substantially affecting my business. But well, one piece of evidence that you might use is actually what Prava said, right? You can use some other cases as the backup evidence as well. That, but look, if you look into the future in the next 1 or 2 years, when I cannot acquire new consumers anymore, and you look at this company, what was the name again? The car proof. The car proof will probably enter the market in itself, and this is one like a stage or a part of the plan that car proof will enter the market and compete against me, and that would essentially lead to the I mean, the point where I might need to really exit the market. If you can show this sort of argument and find the evidence, one piece of evidence is by using other cases, but other pieces of documents or evidence could be maybe to do this sort of trajectory analysis to argue, then probably that would increase the weight of your argument. But maybe it's true that you might need to you might want to fire your lawyers and also your team of analysts. But I really want to have a closer look into the document before probably saying that, because they're not a small company, right? So yeah, but it's going to be so interesting. Yeah. But what you see here, right, it is pretty much, I mean, it's pretty much a fight that you have to prove, you have to push the boundary and say that, well, the degree or the severity of the conduct, I mean, of the consequence of the conduct is substantial enough, not now but in the future. This is a sort of unavoidable consequence that we would have to face, right? So that if that is the case and you can prove it, I mean, in a rigid manner, probably you can convince the court or the tribunal here, and the leftists might be satisfied. And you go on to have a look at the other conditions stated in section 75, right? That it has this impact on competition, right? Okay. Any other points?
No for me.
No, for me too.
All right. Okay. I mean, great job. Again, I think I do learn a lot as well, and hopefully you do as well. So this is pretty much the last topic, and next time we would have this practical session. We will talk to Dr. Pacharasut, who is as I mentioned last time, right? Who is an economist working in the field of IO, which is industrial organization. It's sort of like a twin sister of antitrust law, but born in the field of economics. Okay. So can I ask you a little favor? It would be great to have some sort of points or questions to talk about during this practical sessions. You can pick any sort of issues from what we discussed earlier, or well, you can maybe well, use this for the benefit of your project as well. I mean, I would like to ask you to come up with maybe up to 3 points or questions, okay, to talk about during the session. And bearing in mind that Dr. Pacharasut is an economist who's been working together with lawyers in so many cases, especially competition cases. But he also an expert in this industrial organization who understands really well the nature of, especially the economic nature of anti-competition practices, right? So please come up with questions or point up to 3 for each of you. Get the most out of it. I mean, maybe you have some points or some information to put in your final project as well. All right, but it needs not to be related to your final projects, but it could be just out of your curiosity or any other issues on this competition law. All right, is this clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's nice. So I'll see you next Friday. Thank you for today.
Thank you.
And have a good weekend. Bye bye.
You too.
ขอบคุณครับ
ครับ